I stood silently in the corner of the grand ballroom, the music echoing through the marble walls, the chandeliers flickering above like stars mocking my presence. My sister, the bride, was surrounded by family and friends, all basking in her glow, while I was treated like the invisible guest. Not that it was anything new. Ever since I returned home after years of military service, my family had acted like I was a ghost who never quite fit in. You could have at least worn a nicer suit, my aunt had whispered loudly as I entered, her eyes scanning me with disappointment. My cousin nudged her partner, smirking in my direction. I swallowed hard, pretending not to notice, clutching the gift envelope I had spent hours deliberating over. As the evening went on, the small humiliations piled up like weights on my shoulders. My name being left off the seating chart, jokes cracked about how I probably didn't even understand wedding etiquette anymore, and no one bothering to include me in the family photos. I stood near the drinks table, a glass of soda in my hand because, as always, I was the one expected to drive someone home. My parents didn't even acknowledge me when I greeted them. My mother gave me a tight-lipped smile while my father offered a dismissive nod. I kept reminding myself I was here for my sister, but even she barely glanced my way, busy being the beautiful bride. It hurt more than I let on. I had faced enemy fire, buried friends, endured endless nights in the cold, but nothing had prepared me for the coldness of my own blood. The room was spinning with laughter, champagne, and superficial warmth, but I felt like a shadow in the middle of a celebration that wanted me gone. A part of me wanted to leave quietly, just slip out and vanish like I had so many times on deployment. But a stronger part, the soldier in me, told me to endure, to stand my ground even if the battlefield was now my own family's indifference. As I stood by the farthest wall, I noticed people giving me occasional glances followed by whispers. I overheard snippets like, "He's always been so ... distant, and didn't he get demoted or something?" which stung more than they should have. They didn't know me. They never asked. They assumed. Years of service, multiple tour, commendations, none of that mattered in this room. Here, I was just the awkward older brother who didn't fit into their polished, selfie-perfect world. The DJ called for a toast, and everyone gathered around, glasses raised, eyes gleaming. My father gave a speech about family pride, conveniently. Skipping over his eldest son, my mother shared stories about my sister's childhood and how proud she was to see her marry a man who understood tradition and ambition. Another subtle jab. Even the best man's speech, filled with humor and charm, made a passing joke about how military people are all stiff and silent. Laughter roared. I smiled politely, my jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. It wasn't the joke, it was the complete lack of acknowledgement. I had built bridges in war zones, commanded hundreds, made decisions that affected lives, but none of that earned me a seat at the family table. I felt a strange heat build in my chest, not from anger, but from an overwhelming sense of alienation. How could they not see me, or worse, did they see me and still choose to ignore who I was? The photos continued, and when someone asked for a siblings-only shot, I was handed the camera to take the picture. "Make sure the lighting is good," my younger brother quipped. I wanted to laugh at the irony how I had coordinated drone surveillance in war and now was being instructed on family lighting. I took the photo, swallowed the ache, and returned to my post near the wall. My sister's new husband hadn't even introduced himself to me properly yet, and I couldn't help but assume he had already been told I was the strange one. My family had curated a narrative of me being distant, unambitious, a little broken, and they wore that story like a comfortable old sweater they refused to discard. I took a step outside to catch a breath, away from the suffocating smiles and staged happiness. The night air was cool, crisp, and silent. I looked up at the sky, trying to ground myself, trying to remember that I had value beyond what these people could see. Just then, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was the wedding photographer. "They want a full family picture before the cake cutting," she said, professionally detached. I nodded and followed her back in, wondering what level of humiliation awaited this time. I stood at the edge of the group, unsure where to position myself. Maybe stand behind my mother muttered, not even looking at me. I did as told. Just as the photographer counted down, my sister's husband stepped in, fresh from greeting some friends, and his gaze landed directly on me. I expected the usual polite nod or complete disregard, but instead, he walked over, shaking my hand. Firmly, "I'm sorry. I don't think I've introduced myself properly," he said, his voice clear and respectful. I opened my mouth to respond, but he suddenly turned to the crowd and said, "Wait before this picture. I have something to say." Everyone froze. Confused faces all around. I was told not to make a big deal. He continued, "But I can't stand here and not acknowledge the honor of having this man here today." He looked me dead in the eye. "Major General," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Thank you for your service." My heart skipped. A hush fell over the entire gathering. For a second, I thought I'd misheard, but then he did something that no one else expected. He stepped back, straightened his posture, and gave me a formal military salute. The room went utterly still. No music, no whispers, no giggles. Just pure, stunned silence. All eyes turned to me as the man my sister had married stood in full respect before me, not as a brother-in-law, but as one man to another, offering the recognition I had never received from my own family. I was frozen for a moment, unsure how to react. The soldier in me took over, and instinctively, I returned the salute with practiced precision. The photographer, sensing something significant, snapped a photo right then, capturing that moment forever. It was like a veil had been lifted from everyone's eyes. My father's expression shifted from disinterest to something like guilt. My mother blinked, clearly caught off guard, and my siblings looked at each other in confusion, as if they were trying to process the version of me that had just been unveiled. The groom, my brother-in-law, turned back to the crowd and added, "This man has saved lives, led soldiers, and earned a rank most of us could only dream of. I'm proud to call him family." Applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then growing, filling the room. Some stood, others looked around sheepishly before clapping. My sister, tears in her eyes, came over and hugged me tightly. I didn't. "No," she whispered. "They never told me everything." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence of decades had just been shattered by one act of public respect. People started approaching me, relatives who had ignored me minutes ago now offering handshakes, thanks, even apologies. One cousin who had mocked my suit earlier now said it looked very commanding. It was surreal. I had always imagined what it might feel like to be seen, truly seen, but I never thought it would come at my sister's wedding, or from someone I barely knew. The tables had turned not because I demanded it, but because someone saw value in me without needing to be told. I looked over at my parents. My father's eyes were on the floor, and my mother seemed unusually quiet, her lips pressed together in a straight line. Maybe they were reevaluating. Maybe it was too late. But in that moment, I didn't care. I had been honored in front of them, in front of everyone. And that was enough for now. The rest of the evening took on a different color, one that I wasn't used to. Not in that space. People no longer avoided eye contact with me. They no longer whispered sarcastically or excluded me from the photo lineup. Instead, I found myself being pulled into conversations I would have never been invited to an hour earlier. A few uncles who had ignored me earlier now asked about my deployments, pretending they always knew I was someone important. I didn't bother correcting them. I simply smiled, offered answers without bitterness, and watched the slow unraveling of their preconceived notions. My sister's husband Daniel stayed close by, subtly checking to make sure no one reverted to their old ways. He wasn't just defending me for the sake of appearances. You could see it in the way he spoke. How he referred to me with pride, how he made sure I had a French drink or a seat beside people who were actually interested in listening. My sister herself kept coming over, asking questions about my life in service, what my days looked like, how I managed the pressure. I could tell she was regretting never asking sooner. And though I wanted to be angry, to say, "Now you care?" I didn't. The warmth in her eyes was genuine. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a sibling again, not just someone who shared blood, but someone who now understood my silence wasn't distance, it was protection. I had been keeping myself safe from the judgment they hurled so easily. The music resumed, the cake was cut, and when it came time for the couple's first dance, Daniel waved me over and said, "Before we begin, there's someone else who deserves a few words." I tried to shake my head, but he handed me the mic anyway. I stood there, looking at a crowd that once dismissed me, and I began to speak. I didn't give a speech about war or medals or sacrifice. I talked about family. About how we assume people who don't talk much are cold or indifferent. How we build narratives around people to justify our own ignorance. I ended by thanking Daniel, not just for respecting me, but for reminding everyone else how easy it is to see someone's worth if you're willing to look. There was something incredibly healing about saying those words aloud, not because I expected transformation, but because it was the first time I had spoken honestly in front of them all. The mic was taken from me with gentle applause, and though some clapped simply because it was polite, others meant it. I could see it in their eyes, the quiet shame, the newfound understanding. After the formalities, I stepped outside again. Needing air, Daniel followed shortly, bringing me a glass of water. "I didn't know they treated you like that," he said. "They didn't talk about you much." I smiled. I figured. It's easier to forget what you're not proud of. He shook his head. "They should be proud. I am. Your sister is too." That salute wasn't a show, it was the least I could do. I nodded, and for once, I didn't feel the need to downplay my achievements. We stood in silence for a bit before my sister joined us, her dress catching the soft wind, her eyes still glassy from the emotional roller coaster. "I want to visit you," she said, "wherever you're stationed next." I told her I'd be retiring soon, settling into a quiet life outside the city. Her eyes lit up. "Then I'll visit even sooner." We laughed, and for the first time in years, it wasn't awkward. Inside, people had started to dance. Some relatives peeked out and motioned for us to join. I hesitated, but my sister reached out her hand. "You've stood alone long enough," she said. I took her hand and walked back into the light, not as the forgotten brother or the misfit soldier, but as someone finally acknowledged. The dance floor welcomed me with more than just music. It welcomed me with respect. Even those who once sneered at me now offered smiles. I didn't trust all of them, but I didn't need to. I had earned my peace that night, not by demanding it, but by being myself, unshaken and true. As the evening wore on and the crowd thinned, I stayed behind to help clean up an old habit from military life, to leave a space better than you found it. My sister joined me, heels in hand, carrying an armful of decorations. We laughed about the confetti mess, and she said, "I wish we had more time together like this growing up." I didn't say it out loud, but I wished that too. So much had passed between us, not because of conflict, but because of distance, formed by silence and misunderstanding. I realized that while war took parts of me, it also gave me a sense of clarity about what really matters, about how precious it is to be seen and loved for who you are. As we folded chairs and packed gifts, other family members came over, helping too, many offering quiet apologies. Some were sincere, others were simply riding the shift in the room. But I accepted each with grace, not for them, but for myself. I had no more space inside me for bitterness. Daniel, still in his wedding attire, grabbed a broom and swept confetti off the dance floor beside me. "Guess this is our first bonding activity as brothers," he joked. I chuckled. "Beats a family roast, that's for sure." We worked side by side, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I was part of something. As the final car pulled away and the venue lights dimmed, I stood at the entrance one last time, breathing in the silence. My sister came up beside me, hugging me tightly. "Don't disappear again," she said. I promised I wouldn't. This time, there was something to come back for. Driving home later that night, the roads were dark but peaceful. My phone buzzed with a dozen new messages, photos from the wedding, compliments, a few relatives trying to reconnect. I smiled at some and ignored others. Not out of spite, but because I was learning to protect my space. I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickering like always, and sat in the car for a while, thinking. I had gone to that wedding expecting to endure yet another evening of being treated like a footnote. Instead, I had received something far more powerful than I imagined. Recognition, not just for my uniform, but for my presence. Daniel didn't salute a rank, he saluted a man, a story, a life lived quietly and fully. And somehow, that act pierced through decades of neglect and misunderstanding. It taught me something vital. Sometimes you don't need to fight for attention. You just need one person to see you, and that can change everything. I stepped out of the car, walked inside, and looked around my small, neatly kept home. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to someone who wasn't invisible anymore. I hung up my suit, removed my medals from the inner pocket where I always carried them, and placed them on the shelf where they belong, not hidden, not stored away. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the night settle in. Somewhere far away, a wedding celebration still echoed in the hearts of many. But for me, the most important celebration was this quiet moment where I was at peace, seen, and whole. Weeks passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The calls from family came more frequently, now not always deep or meaningful, but there was effort. My sister and Daniel visited, bringing stories and plans and a genuine desire to stay connected. At first, I was cautious, wondering if it was all surface level. But slowly, I saw it wasn't. My mother called one afternoon, her voice shaky as she apologized, not with elaborate explanations, but with the kind of vulnerability that doesn't need big words. My father visited one day and announced, just to check in. He didn't say much, but he looked at the medals on my shelf and nodded. That was enough. I realized healing doesn't always come with dramatic speeches. Sometimes it comes in gestures, in silence filled with new meaning. I was still me, still quiet, still reserved, still carrying stories I wouldn't tell easily. But now I wasn't carrying them alone. My family had finally decided to walk beside me, even if they were a little late to the journey. And as I stood in front of the mirror one morning, adjusting the tie for another formal event, a military send-off, I thought about that night again. The wedding, the salute, the moment everything shifted. I had gone there invisible and left, unforgettable. And no matter how many years had passed in silence, that one moment, that one salute, had rewritten everything.